The wind carried nothing but dust and broken promises across the Nebraska Territory that autumn of 1882. Sarah McKenna stood at the edge of her property, one hand shielding her eyes from the relentless sun, the other resting on the weathered fence post that marked the boundary between survival and surrender. The grass, once green and promising when she'd first arrived as a bride 5 years ago, now lay brown and brittle beneath her feet, crackling with each step like the hope she'd buried alongside her husband. The house behind her groaned against the afternoon wind, its wooden boards warped and gray from too many seasons of neglect. Samuel had built it with his own hands, promising her it would grow stronger with time, that they'd add rooms as their family grew. Now it stood as a monument to dreams cut short, listing slightly to the east where the foundation had begun to give way. She'd tried to shore it up herself, but a widow's hands could only do so much against the relentless prairie weather. "Mama, the water barrel's near empty again," called 7-year-old Thomas from the doorway. His voice, thin and worried, cut through her thoughts. The boy had his father's eyes, deep brown and serious, but where Samuel's had sparkled with optimism, Thomas's held the wariness of a child who'd learned too young that the world could snatch away what you loved most. "I'll draw more from the well after supper," Sarah replied, forcing steadiness into her voice. The well was running low too, but Thomas didn't need to know that. Not yet. She'd figure something out, just as she had every day since that terrible morning 14 months ago when Sheriff Watson had ridden up with his hat in his hands and news that shattered her world. The Jameson gang. Even now, the name made her stomach clench with a mixture of grief and rage. They'd killed Samuel for the contents of his saddlebags, barely $20 and a silver pocket watch that had belonged to his father. $20 and a family heirloom in exchange for a man's life, for a boy's father, for a woman's anchor in this harsh land. A dust devil danced across the yard, swirling past the chicken coop where only 3 hens remained. The others had been traded for flour and salt in town. Each trip to Morrison's general store, an exercise in holding her head high while whispers followed her like shadows. Poor thing, she'd heard Mrs. Morrison murmur to her sister last week. Pride won't put food on her table come winter. Pride and propriety. The sister had replied with that particular tone reserved for discussing the unfortunate. She'd do better to sell to Mr. Hartley and move back east where she belongs. A woman alone out here. It ain't natural. Sarah's jaw tightened at the memory. Back east. As if she had anywhere to return to. As if her parents hadn't disowned her for marrying a dreamer heading west. As if this patch of hard-won land wasn't all that remained of Samuel's legacy for their son. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention to the horizon. A lone rider emerged from the heat shimmer, moving with the easy grace of someone born to the saddle, even at a distance. She recognized the broad shoulders and familiar slouch. Jake Colton. She felt the usual mixture of gratitude and unease that accompanied his visits. Jake had been Samuel's friend since their cavalry days, the two of them surviving the war only to seek their fortunes in the unforgiving West, where Samuel had been quick to laugh and quicker to trust. Jake was all sharp edges and silence. He'd stood beside them at their wedding, his gray eyes unreadable as he'd wished them well. After Samuel's death, he'd simply appeared one day with a load of firewood, split and stacked it without a word, and rode off before she could properly thank him. Since then, he'd come by every few weeks, never staying long, never accepting her offers of coffee or supper, just tending to whatever needed fixing. Last month it was the loose boards on the porch. Before that, a new rope for the well, always watching the horizon while he worked, as if expecting trouble to come riding in at any moment. "Afternoon, Mrs. McKenna," Jake said, touching the brim of his hat as he reined in near the fence. Dust settled around his horse, a sturdy paint that looked as tough and weathered as its rider. "Mr. Colton," Sarah nodded, smoothing her apron. "I wasn't expecting you. Noticed your fence was down along the north pasture when I rode by yesterday." He dismounted in one fluid motion, already reaching for the tools in his saddlebags. "Best to fix it before your cattle stray." Her cattle. All three of them. Sarah bit back a bitter laugh. I appreciate your concern, but I can manage. I'm sure you can. He cut her off, not unkindly, already examining the damaged fence posts. But I'm here now. She watched him work, noting the efficiency of his movements, the way his hands, scarred and capable, handled the repairs with practiced ease. He'd removed his jacket, and his shirt stretched across his back as he wrestled with a stubborn post. There was something both comforting and unsettling about his presence, like a guard dog that might turn wild at any moment. How's the boy? Jake asked without looking up from his work. Growing like a weed, too fast for his clothes. Sarah hesitated, then added, He's been asking about learning to ride properly. Samuel was going to teach him. Jake's hands stilled for a moment. I could show him, if you've no objection. The offer surprised her. In all his visits, Jake had barely acknowledged Thomas beyond a nod. That's kind of you, but I couldn't impose. No imposition. He drove a nail home with 3 precise strikes. Boy needs to know how to handle a horse out here. Mr. Colton. Thomas had appeared on the porch, his face bright with curiosity. Did you bring your horse? The painted one. A ghost of a smile crossed Jake's weathered features. Storm's over by the fence. Boy, you can look, but don't spook him. He's particular about strangers. Thomas scrambled down the steps, then stopped, looking back at his mother. At her nod, he approached the horse with the cautious excitement of a child who'd learned to temper his enthusiasms. Mama. His wife took sick last spring. Mrs. Henley had whispered at church last month, nodding toward Jake's retreating back. Died before the summer. They say he went half mad with grief, disappeared into the mountains for weeks, came back different, quieter, if such a thing was possible. Sarah had stored away this information, adding it to the meager pile of facts she knew about Jake Colton. It explained the shadows in his eyes, the way he held himself apart from the world, 2 broken souls circling each other in the vast emptiness of the prairie. The sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Jake finished with the fence and began gathering his tools. Sarah found herself moving toward the house before she quite knew what she was doing. Mr. Colton, she called. Would you? That is, we were about to have supper. Nothing fancy, just beans and cornbread, but you're welcome to join us. He paused, his back to her. For a moment she thought he might accept, break the pattern of their strange, formal dance. Then he turned, and she saw the walls go up behind his eyes. Appreciate the offer, ma'am, but I need to get back. Weather's turning. She glanced at the clear sky, understanding the real reason for his refusal. In a town where widows were watched and gossip spread faster than wildfire, a single man sharing supper with a woman alone could destroy what little reputation she had left. Of course, she said, hating the disappointment in her voice. Thank you for the fence. He mounted his horse with that same easy grace, then surprised her by reaching into his jacket. Almost forgot. Picked these up at Morrison's. He handed down a small cloth sack. Seeds for your kitchen garden? Thought you might use them come spring. Before she could respond, before she could ask how he knew her garden had failed this year, or insist on paying him back, he'd wheeled Storm around and was riding away, a dark silhouette against the dying light. Sarah stood there holding the seeds, watching until he disappeared over a rise. The weight of the small sack in her hands felt heavier than it should, loaded with implications she didn't dare examine too closely. Mama, Thomas said, appearing at her side. Why doesn't Mr. Colton ever stay? Don't he like us? She put her arm around her son, drawing him close. I think Mr. Colton likes us just fine, she said softly. Sometimes people show caring in different ways. As they walked back to the house, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Jake Colton's careful distance was less about protecting her reputation and more about protecting himself. From what? She couldn't say, but as she tucked the seed packet into her apron pocket, she wondered if spring might bring more than just new growth to her garden. The wind picked up as evening fell, rattling the windows and reminding her of all the repairs still needed. But for now, she had seeds for spring, a mended fence, and the strange comfort of knowing someone was watching over them, even from afar. In the harsh arithmetic of frontier survival, it was more than many widows could claim. The news arrived on a Tuesday morning, carried by Ezra Finch, the banker's clerk, whose nervous disposition made him wholly unsuited for delivering troublesome tidings. Sarah watched from her kitchen window as his buggy approached, kicking up dust clouds that seemed to announce calamity before he'd even reached her gate. "Mrs. McKenna," Ezra stammered, hat clutched in sweaty hands. "Mr. Hartley sent me to— that is, he wanted me to inform you." He thrust a folded paper at her as if it might bite. "There's been a development regarding your property." Sarah's fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded the document. Legal words swam before her eyes. Mineral rights. Prior claim. 30 days to contest. But the meaning was clear enough. Josiah Hartley, the territory's wealthiest rancher and recent inheritor of his uncle's eastern fortune, was claiming her land based on some obscure clause in the original territorial charter. "Mr. Hartley wishes me to convey," Ezra continued, mopping his brow, "that he's prepared to make a generous offer, enough for you and the boy to start fresh elsewhere, perhaps back east, where you'd be more comfortable." "Comfortable," Sarah repeated the word like it was foreign. "Please tell Mr. Hartley that I'm perfectly comfortable where I am." After Ezra's hasty departure, Sarah sank into Samuel's old chair. The letter crumpled in her fist. 30 days. She had 30 days to find a lawyer. She couldn't afford to fight a man who owned half the county. The walls of the small house seemed to press closer, and for a moment, she allowed herself the luxury of despair. That afternoon, she hitched up the wagon for the weekly trip to town. Thomas sat beside her, chattering about the hawk he'd seen circling their chicken coop, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around them. Sarah envied him his innocence, even as she steeled herself for what awaited in Morrison's store. The town of Cedar Ridge sprawled along Main Street like a dog too tired to move from the sun. False-fronted buildings lined the dusty thoroughfare, their painted signs fading in the relentless weather. Sarah kept her eyes forward as she guided the wagon past the saloon, where a few early patrons loitered on the porch, their conversations dying as she passed. Morrison's general store smelled of pickle brine and leather, coffee beans and coal oil. Sarah had once loved that mixture of scents, the promise of abundance it represented. Now it reminded her of all the things she could no longer afford. "Mrs. McKenna." Henry Morrison nodded from behind the counter, his expression carefully neutral. "What can I do for you today?" Sarah handed over her list: flour, salt, a small tin of lard, the bare necessities. As Morrison gathered her items, she became aware of the hushed conversation near the fabric display. "Already sent his man around," Mrs. Prudence Hartley was saying to her companion. "Mrs. Douglas. Josiah says it's really a kindness. The poor thing clearly can't manage on her own." "Still, Mrs. Douglas replied. "It seems harsh, turning her out, and with winter coming. Oh, Josiah's not heartless. He's offered a very fair price. More than fair, considering." Prudence's voice dropped, but not quite low enough. "Between you and me, I think he's being too generous. After all, a woman in her position can't afford to be particular." Sarah's hands clenched around her purse. A woman in her position, as if widowhood was a disease that might be catching. "That'll be $2.30, Morrison said, louder than necessary. His eyes held a flicker of sympathy that somehow made everything worse. Sarah counted out the coins carefully, aware that every eye in the store was upon her. As she gathered her purchases, Thomas tugged at her skirt. "Mama, can I have a penny candy?" "Not today, sweetheart." "But you promised last time." "I said not today." "Thomas." The sharpness in her voice made him step back, his brown eyes wide with hurt. The silence in the store was deafening. Sarah felt her face burn as she ushered Thomas toward the door. Behind them, the whispers resumed like buzzing flies. Outside, she nearly collided with Jake Colton, who was tying Storm to the hitching post. He steadied her with a hand on her elbow, his gray eyes taking in her flushed face and Thomas's dejected expression. Mrs. McKenna. He touched his hat brim, then looked down at Thomas. Boy. Mr. Colton. Thomas brightened immediately. Did you see? Mr. Morrison got a new saddle in the window. It's got silver conchos and everything. That's so? Jake's expression softened marginally. He reached into his vest pocket and produced a penny. Why don't you run back in and get yourself something sweet? Mind you share with your mother. Thomas looked to Sarah for permission. At her reluctant nod, he scampered back into the store, leaving them alone on the boardwalk. You didn't need to do that, Sarah said quietly. Boy wanted candy. Jake shrugged, but his eyes remained watchful. Everything all right? She wanted to laugh at the question. Nothing had been all right for 14 months, but she merely said, Fine, thank you. He studied her for a long moment, and she had the unsettling feeling he could see right through her carefully constructed composure. Heard Hartley's been making noise about land rights. News travels fast. It's a small town. He paused, seeming to weigh his words. You got anyone to speak for you, legal-wise? I'll manage. The words came out more forcefully than intended. I always do. Something shifted in his expression, frustration, perhaps, or disappointment. Pride makes a cold bedfellow. Mrs. McKenna. Before she could respond, Thomas burst through the door, clutching a paper bag of peppermint sticks. Look, Mama, Mr. Morrison gave me extra 'cause I was polite. The ride home was quiet, except for Thomas's contented sucking on his candy. Sarah's mind churned over Jake's words, Prudence Hartley's condescension, the weight of that legal notice in her pocket. As they crested the hill overlooking their property, she pulled up short. 3 riders were circling her house, their horses' hooves trampling her struggling kitchen garden. Even from a distance, she recognized Bull Henderson, Hartley's foreman, by his massive frame and distinctive black hat. Thomas, she said quietly, get in the back of the wagon and stay down. But Mama, do as I say, now. She approached slowly, her hands tight on the reins. The men turned at the sound of wheels, and Bull Henderson smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. Afternoon, Mrs. McKenna. Just having a look around. Mr. Hartley wanted us to assess the property. For the sale, you understand. There won't be any sale. Mr. Henderson. Now kindly remove yourselves from my land. Your land, another rider, a lean man with pale eyes, chuckled. That's what's in dispute, ain't it? Way I hear it, this'll be Hartley property soon enough. Until a court says otherwise, it's mine. And you're trespassing. Bull Henderson nudged his horse closer to the wagon, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. Now, ma'am, no need for unpleasantness. We're just following orders. Though I'd think a smart woman would see which way the wind's blowing. Take the money and get while the getting's good. And if I don't? His smile widened. Well now, that'd be a shame. Accidents happen out here. Fences break, wells go bad, livestock wanders off. Dangerous place for a woman alone. Sarah's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. Are you threatening me, Mr. Henderson? Threatening? He affected shock. No, ma'am, just observing, noting how vulnerable a place like this is. Why, anyone could ride up here, day or night. You'd never know until it was too late. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made them all turn. Jake Colton crested the rise at full gallop, Storm's hooves eating up the distance. He reined in hard between the wagon and Henderson's men, his hand resting casually on the butt of his colt. Afternoon, boys. His voice was pleasant, but Sarah saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes never left Henderson's face. Bit far from the Hartley spread, aren't you? Colton. Henderson's smile faltered. Just conducting business. Business is conducted in offices, not in ladies' gardens. Jake's tone remained conversational, but something dangerous lurked beneath. "I believe Mrs. McKenna asked you to leave. This ain't your concern, Colton. I'm making it my concern." The words fell like stones into still water. "Now, you boys can ride out nice and peaceful. Or we can discuss this further. Your choice." For a moment, the air crackled with potential violence. Sarah found herself holding her breath, acutely aware of Thomas huddled in the wagon bed behind her. Then Henderson laughed, an ugly sound. No need for gunplay over a misunderstanding. He wheeled his horse around, his men following. "We'll be going, but Colton, you can't watch over her forever, and Hartley always gets what he wants." They rode off in a cloud of dust and bravado. Jake remained where he was until they disappeared over the horizon, then turned Storm toward the wagon. "You all right?" Sarah realized she was shaking. "Yes, thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't. You got a gun in the house?" The abrupt question startled her. "Samuel's rifle, but know how to use it?" "Of course I know how to use it." "Good. Keep it loaded and handy." He glanced at the trampled garden, his jaw tightening. "I'll come by tomorrow. Help you replant. Mr. Colton, I can't keep accepting—" "Yes," he said firmly. "You can, and you will." His eyes softened slightly. "Samuel would have done the same for my Mary, if things had been different." The mention of their dead spouses hung between them like a bridge neither dared cross. Then Thomas popped up from the wagon bed, breaking the moment. "That was amazing. Mr. Colton, you scared them good." A ghost of a smile touched Jake's lips. "Wasn't trying to scare anyone. Boy, just encouraging them to mind their manners." As Jake rode away, Sarah sat in the wagon, processing what had just happened. The threat was clear now, written in trampled vegetables and Henderson's leering smile. Hartley wouldn't wait for legal proceedings. He'd try to force her out through fear and intimidation. "Mama," Thomas said quietly, "are those men going to come back?" Sarah pulled her son close, feeling the weight of the rifle under the wagon seat. "Maybe, but we'll be ready if they do." That night, she loaded Samuel's rifle and placed it by the door. Sleep came fitfully, every creak of the house, every whisper of wind, sending her heart racing. But when dawn broke over the prairie, she was still there, still holding on. The seeds Jake had given her lay on the kitchen table, promise and mockery combined. How could she plant for spring when winter threatened to sweep everything away? But as the first rays of sun touched the trampled garden, Sarah made her decision. She'd replant, she'd fight, and maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't have to do it alone. The attack came 3 nights later, under a moonless sky that swallowed sounds and shadows alike. Sarah woke to the panicked screaming of horses and the acrid smell of smoke. Through the window, orange flames danced in the barn, licking at the darkness with hungry tongues. "Thomas!" She shook her son awake, throwing his coat over his nightshirt. "Get under the bed and stay there. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Mama, what's— Do as I say." She grabbed Samuel's rifle from beside the door, checking the chamber with hands that had steadied themselves through practice. The weight of it felt both foreign and familiar, like embracing a stranger who wore her husband's clothes. Outside, the night erupted in chaos. Dark figures moved between the buildings, their shouts mixing with the terrified whinnying of her milk cow. Sarah pressed herself against the porch pillar, rifle raised, searching for a clear target in the dancing shadows cast by the fire. "That's far enough," she called out, her voice carrying over the crackling flames. "I've got a rifle and I know how to use it." Laughter answered her, harsh, mocking. Bull Henderson emerged from behind the chicken coop, his massive frame silhouetted against the burning barn. "Well now, Mrs. McKenna, seems you got yourself a fire problem. Dangerous thing. Fire. Spreads quick if there's no one to fight it." 2 more men flanked him, their face hidden by bandanas. One carried a torch, swinging it lazily like a child with a toy. Sarah's finger found the trigger, but she knew the arithmetic. 3 men, spread out, and her with 1 rifle and no time to reload. "Leave now," she commanded, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "Before this goes further than property damage." "Property damage?" Henderson took a step closer. Don't see no property damage here, just an unfortunate accident. Old barns burn all the time, especially when their owners are too stubborn to see sense. The man with the torch moved toward the house. Sarah swung the rifle toward him. One more step and I'll drop you where you stand. You might get one of us. Henderson agreed pleasantly. But then what? You think that boy of yours can reload fast enough to get the rest? Ice flooded Sarah's veins. They knew Thomas was inside. Of course they did. These men had been watching, waiting, learning her vulnerabilities. The rifle suddenly felt impossibly heavy. Now, here's what's going to happen, Henderson continued, his voice taking on the tone of a patient teacher. You're going to put down that rifle, pack up your things, and be gone by sunrise. Mr. Hartley's generosity expires tonight. Come morning, there won't be any offer. Just a burned-out widow with nowhere to go. The barn roof collapsed with a shower of sparks, illuminating the yard in hellish light. Sarah's 3 precious cattle had fled through the broken fence, vanishing into the darkness. Months of barely surviving. And now this. The temptation to surrender washed over her like a black tide. Mama? Thomas's small voice drifted from the house, frightened and questioning. Stay inside, baby, she called back, blinking away tears that had nothing to do with smoke. Henderson smiled, sensing victory. Smart woman, no shame in knowing when you're beaten. Tell you what, you put down that rifle nice and slow, and we'll even help you load your wagon. Sarah began to lower the rifle, defeat bitter in her throat. Then she heard it, the thunder of approaching hoofbeats, fast and hard. Henderson heard it too, his smile vanishing as he spun toward the sound. Jake Colton burst into the yard like an avenging angel, Storm's hooves barely touching ground. He came off the horse in a fluid motion, his Colt already drawn. The first shot took the torch from the man's hand, sending it spinning into the dirt. The second shot removed Henderson's hat, close enough to part his hair. Evening, boys, Jake said conversationally, though his eyes were chips of flint in the firelight. Bit late for a social call. Henderson's hand moved toward his gun. Jake's Colt swung toward him with deadly precision. I wouldn't. Your friends neither. Everyone keeps their hands where I can see them. This ain't your fight, Colton. Henderson growled, but his bravado had curdled into something uglier. Made it my fight when you brought it to this lady's door. Jake moved closer, positioning himself between the men and the house. Now, way I see it, you boys got 2 choices. Mount up and ride out, or I start shooting pieces off you, beginning with parts you'll miss most. Sarah watched, heart hammering, as the barn continued to burn behind them. The other 2 men looked to Henderson, clearly out of their depth. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. A widow alone was easy prey. A widow with Jake Colton standing guard was another matter entirely. Hartley won't like this, Henderson said finally. You're making a powerful enemy. I've had powerful enemies before. Jake's voice carried the weight of old battles. Buried most of them. Your move, bull. For a long moment, the only sounds were the crackling fire and the distant lowing of scattered cattle. Then Henderson spat in the dirt and jerked his head at his men. Let's go. This ain't over, Colton. Not by a long shot. They mounted their horses with ill grace. Henderson turning for one last threat. You can't guard her forever. And when you're not around. Jake's shot split the night, so close to Henderson's ear that the big man flinched and nearly fell from his saddle. Next one won't miss. Now get! They rode hard into the darkness, leaving behind the dying barn and the acrid smell of burned dreams. Jake stood motionless until the hoofbeats faded, then slowly holstered his Colt. Only then did Sarah see the slight tremor in his hands, the way he favored his left side. You're hurt, she said, coming down from the porch. It's nothing. But when he turned, she saw the dark stain spreading across his shirt. Caught one riding in. Didn't have time to be careful. Dear God, Jake. She caught herself using his given name but didn't correct it. Get inside, now. He swayed slightly, and she moved without thinking, sliding under his arm to support him. He was heavier than expected, solid muscle and bone, and he smelled of leather and gun smoke and something indefinably male. Together they stumbled toward the house. "Mama?" Thomas stood in the doorway, eyes wide with fear and excitement. "Get the medical supplies from the kitchen," Sarah ordered. "Hurry now." She helped Jake to Samuel's chair, trying not to think about the strangeness of another man bleeding in her husband's place. His shirt was soaked through on the left side, and when she helped him remove it, she bit back a gasp. The bullet had carved a deep furrow along his ribs, bleeding freely but missing anything vital. "Lucky," Jake said through gritted teeth. "Inch to the right and we'd be having a different conversation." Sarah worked in silence, cleaning the wound with hands that had grown steady through necessity. Thomas hovered nearby, fascinated despite his fear, handing her bandages and watching Jake with something approaching hero worship. "Why?" she asked finally, tying off the bandage. "Why risk this for us?" Jake was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, voice low, "Samuel saved my life once, during the war. Pulled me out of a burning building when everyone else left me for dead." He looked up at her, and she saw depths of pain that had nothing to do with his wound. "I couldn't save him from the Jameson gang. Wasn't there when he needed me. But I can do this. I can keep his family safe." "Is that all we are to you? A debt to be paid?" His gray eyes caught hers and held. "You know it's not." The words hung between them, heavy with possibility and impossibility alike. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the dying fire outside. This was dangerous territory, more threatening than Henderson and all his men. "Mr. Colton," Thomas piped up, breaking the spell. Was that really Mr. Henderson, from the Hartley Ranch? Jake's expression softened as he looked at the boy. "It was, but don't you worry about him. He won't be back tonight. But the barns can be rebuilt." Jake's hand found Thomas's shoulder, gentle despite its strength. "What matters is you and your mama are safe." Sarah stood abruptly, needing distance from the intimacy of the moment. Through the window, she could see the barn's remains, still glowing with embers. Months of stored hay. What few tools they had, all gone, even if she fought Hartley's claim. How could she survive winter now? "You're thinking too loud," Jake said quietly. She laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Am I? And what am I thinking, Mr. Colton?" "That you're alone, that this is too much for one person to bear." He struggled to his feet despite her protests. "But you're not alone. Not anymore." "Jake, I'll bunk in what's left of the barn tonight. Keep watch. Come morning, we'll figure out next steps. You can't sleep outside with that wound. I've slept in worse places with worse wounds." He retrieved his ruined shirt, wincing at the movement. "Got a spare in my saddlebags. Thomas, want to help me check on Storm, make sure those fools didn't spook him too bad?" The boy jumped at the chance, and soon Sarah found herself alone in the house that suddenly felt too empty and too full all at once. She touched the back of Samuel's chair where Jake's blood had left a small stain, wondering when everything had become so complicated. Outside, she could hear Jake's low voice explaining something to Thomas, probably about horses or guns, or how to be brave when the world was burning down around you. The familiar and the foreign braiding together into something that made her chest tight with emotions she didn't dare name. She'd fought to keep this land for Samuel's memory, for Thomas's legacy. But tonight, with Jake Colton bleeding in her chair and Henderson's threats echoing in her ears, she wondered if she was fighting for something else entirely, something that had to do with gray eyes and steady hands, and the way a hard man could be gentle with a frightened boy. The moon emerged from behind clouds, illuminating the skeleton of the barn and the man standing guard beside it. Sarah pressed her palm against the cool window glass and made a decision. Come morning, she'd stop fighting alone, whatever that meant, whatever it cost. She'd accept the help Jake offered. Because Henderson was right about one thing, this wasn't over, but he was wrong about another. She wasn't just a widow anymore. She was a woman who'd found her courage in the barrel of a rifle and the unexpected arrival of a complicated man who carried his own ghosts. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The Sunday service at Cedar Ridge Baptist Church had never felt longer. Sarah sat in her usual pew, Thomas fidgeting beside her, acutely aware of the whispers that followed them like smoke from the burned barn. 3 days had passed since the fire, and the town's gossip mill had ground the story into something barely recognizable. "Stay the night," they say. "Mrs." Abernathy hissed to her daughter 2 rows back. "That Colton man, bold as brass." "Protecting them," the daughter whispered back. "From those ruffians." "Is that what they're calling it now?" "Mrs." Abernathy's tone could have curdled milk. A decent woman would have gone to the sheriff, not taken up with a drifter. Sarah kept her eyes fixed on Reverend Michaels, though his sermon on the virtues of propriety felt pointed as a blade, beside the pulpit. Josiah Hartley sat in the front row, his presence commanding even in silence. He'd arrived in town 2 years ago, buying up land and influence with his Eastern money, transforming himself from carpetbagger to cattle baron through sheer force of will and wealth. When the service ended, Sarah tried to slip out quickly, but Reverend Michaels intercepted her at the door. His thin face creased with what he probably thought was paternal concern. "Mrs. McKenna," a word. She sent Thomas ahead to the wagon, steeling herself. "Yes, Reverend. I've heard troubling reports about your situation, the fire, the altercation." He lowered his voice. "And about Mr. Colton's involvement. Mr. Colton helped defend my property from vandals. I fail to see what's troubling about that." "My dear woman," the Reverend's tone grew condescending. "Surely you understand how it appears. A widow, alone, accepting protection from a man of questionable reputation. People talk. People always talk." Sarah lifted her chin. Perhaps they should find more Christian uses for their tongues. His face flushed. "Mrs. McKenna, I'm trying to help you. Your position in this community is already delicate. Mr. Hartley has expressed concern." "Has he?" Sarah's voice could have etched glass. "How Christian of him to be concerned while his men burn down widows' barns. That's a serious accusation without proof." The Reverend glanced nervously at Hartley, who was watching their exchange with interest. "Perhaps if you were to consider Mr. Hartley's offer, a fresh start elsewhere, with enough money to establish yourself properly, it would be best for everyone, especially your boy. What's best for my boy is keeping his father's land." Sarah moved a step past him, but he caught her arm. "Pride goeth before a fall, Mrs. McKenna, and you have very far to fall indeed." She yanked her arm free, anger burning hot enough to sear away caution. "Then I'll thank you to step aside and let me fall in peace." "Reverend." Outside, the October sun offered little warmth against the chill of judgment. Sarah helped Thomas into the wagon, ignoring the clusters of townspeople who watched her departure with expressions ranging from pity to disapproval. As she took up the reins, Josiah Hartley emerged from the church, making his way toward them with unhurried purpose. He was a handsome man in the way that money could make a man handsome, well-dressed, well-groomed, with the soft look of someone who hired others to do his sweating, but his eyes were cold as winter river stones. "Mrs. McKenna." He touched the brim of his expensive hat. "I heard about your misfortune. Terrible thing. Fires. So destructive." "Yes," Sarah agreed evenly. "Especially when they're deliberately set." His smile never wavered. "That's a dangerous accusation. I hope you have proof to support it." "I have the word of the men who did it. They were quite clear about who sent them." "Ah, but you see, that's the problem with criminals. So unreliable." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I'm not an unkind man. Mrs. McKenna, my offer still stands, despite recent unpleasantness. 20% above market value, enough to set you and your boy up comfortably anywhere you choose. My husband is buried on that land. Mr. Hartley, it's not for sale. Everything's for sale. At the right price." His smile sharpened. "Or taken, when the seller proves too stubborn. The law favors those who can afford it. Mrs. McKenna, how much justice can you buy with pride and poverty? Before Sarah could respond, Jake Colton materialized beside the wagon, moving with the quiet grace that made him dangerous. He'd cleaned up for church, though he hadn't attended, and his dark coat didn't quite hide the bulk of bandages beneath. Mrs. McKenna. Jake touched his hat, then turned those gray eyes on Hartley. Mr. Hartley. Fine sermon today, wasn't it? All that talk about bearing false witness makes a man think. Hartley's expression soured. Colton, I'd heard you were involving yourself where you don't belong. Just being neighborly. Jake's hand rested casually near his gun belt, the gesture not quite a threat. Helping out where I can, Christian duty and all. Is that what you call it? Hartley's gaze flicked between them, calculating. Interesting interpretation, though I suppose a man like you would have unique perspectives on Christian duty. The reference to Jake's past hung in the air like gun smoke. Sarah saw Jake's jaw tighten, but his voice remained level. We all got our crosses to bear, Mr. Hartley. Some of us just carry them more honestly than others. Indeed. Hartley stepped back, but his smile promised nothing good. Well, I'll leave you to your neighborly activities. Mrs. McKenna, my offer won't remain open indefinitely. I encourage you to consider your son's future. He strode away, leaving silence in his wake. Around them, the good people of Cedar Ridge found urgent reasons to be elsewhere, though Sarah knew they'd watch from windows and doorways. You shouldn't have come, Sarah said quietly. It only makes things worse. Things are already worse. Jake swung up onto Storm with only a slight wince. I'll ride with you. Make sure you get home safe. They traveled in silence, Thomas dozing in the wagon bed despite the jolts. The burned barn stood like an accusation against the autumn sky, black timbers reaching toward heaven. Sarah tried not to think about winter coming, about hay she couldn't store and animals she couldn't shelter, as if reading her thoughts. Jake said, I know a man over in Pine Valley, owes me a favor. He's got extra lumber. Mike could spare some hay too. I can't. You can and you will. His tone brooked no argument. Samuel would have done the same. Always Samuel between them, Sarah thought. The ghost that gave Jake permission to care and her permission to accept it. But sometimes, in moments like this, she wondered what would happen if they could let that ghost rest. They spent the afternoon working in companionable silence, Jake teaching Thomas how to clear the burned debris while Sarah salvaged what she could. It was domestic in a way that made her heart ache, the three of them moving in easy rhythm, as if they'd done this 100 times before. As the sun began its descent, Jake built a fire in the yard, controlled, contained, nothing like the destructive blaze of 3 nights ago. They sat around it, sharing the simple meal Sarah had prepared. And for a moment she could pretend this was normal, that they were a family instead of a widow, an orphan, and a damaged man playing at belonging. Tell me about the war, Thomas said suddenly, startling them both. Mama says you and Papa were soldiers together. Jake stared into the fire for a long moment. That's right. Your PA and I rode with the 7th Cavalry for a time. Did you kill lots of enemies? Thomas, Sarah admonished, but Jake held up a hand. It's all right. Boy's got a right to know. He chose his words carefully. War's not about killing, son. It's about surviving, about protecting the man beside you and hoping he's doing the same. Your PA, he was the best man I ever rode with. Brave, loyal, kind, even when kindness was dangerous. How did he save you? Thomas leaned forward, eager. From the fire, Jake's eyes found Sarah's across the flames. Supply depot caught fire during a raid. I was trapped under a beam. Smoke so thick you couldn't see your hand. Everyone else had retreated, given me up for dead. But your PA, he came back, smaller man than me, but he got that beam up somehow, dragged me out just before the whole thing came down. Wow. Thomas's eyes shone with hero worship. Just like you saved us from those bad men. No, Jake said firmly. Your mama saved herself. I just evened the odds a little. Sarah felt warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Don't sell yourself short. We'd have been in serious trouble without you. You'd have figured something out. But his small smile said he appreciated the words. You're stronger than you know. Sarah. Her name on his lips sent an unexpected shiver through her. When had she become Sarah instead of Mrs. McKenna? When had the formal distance between them eroded into something dangerously intimate, as if sensing the shift? Jake stood. I should go. Check the perimeter before full dark. Jake! She stood too, aware of Thomas watching them with curious eyes. What Hartley said about your past is true enough. His voice went flat. I've done things that would turn your stomach. The war didn't end clean for everyone. Sarah, some of us, we kept fighting even after the surrender. Took a while to find our way back to civilized. That's not who you are now. Isn't it? He laughed, bitter and short. I near killed Henderson the other night. Would have, if you hadn't been watching. That darkness is still in me. Always will be. We all have darkness. Sarah stepped closer, close enough to see the pain etched in the lines around his eyes. What matters is what we choose to do with it. He studied her for a long moment, and she wondered what he saw. A naive widow clinging to romantic notions, or a woman who'd stared down her own darkness and chosen to keep fighting. Your husband was a lucky man, he said finally. Luckier than he knew. Before she could respond, he'd stepped back, rebuilding the walls between them with practiced ease. I'll camp out by the road tonight. Anyone comes calling, they'll have to go through me first. He disappeared into the gathering darkness, leaving Sarah standing by the fire with her son and a heart full of questions she didn't dare voice. In the distance, a coyote howled, lonely and wild. She understood the feeling. Mama, Thomas said quietly, do you like Mr. Colton? Of course I like him. He's been very kind to us. No, I mean... Thomas struggled with words beyond his years. Do you like him the way you like Papa? Sarah knelt beside her son, brushing hair from his forehead. Your Papa was special. Thomas, what we had, that doesn't come twice in a lifetime. But as she tucked him into bed that night, she wondered if she was lying to them both. Because what she felt when Jake Colton looked at her with those storm-gray eyes wasn't the sweet, uncomplicated love she'd shared with Samuel. It was something wilder, edged with danger and possibility. Something that scared her as much as it called to her. Through the window, she could see the faint glow of Jake's campfire down by the road, standing guard, as promised, protecting them from external threats while she fought the internal ones. The voice that whispered she was betraying Samuel's memory. The louder voice that wondered if Samuel would want her to be alone forever. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Hartley wouldn't give up easily, and the town's disapproval would only grow. But tonight, with her son safe in bed and a complicated man keeping watch in the darkness, Sarah allowed herself a moment of something that felt dangerously like hope. The riders came at dawn, their dust cloud visible from the kitchen window where Sarah was preparing breakfast. Not Henderson this time. These men wore badges, and Sheriff Watson led them with the reluctant air of a man forced into an unpleasant duty. Pack what you need, Jake said quietly, already reaching for his rifle. He'd appeared at the door moments before, as if he'd sensed trouble approaching. Take Thomas and head for the canyon. I'll buy you time. No. Sarah set down the coffee pot with steady hands. This is my fight. I won't run from my own home. Sarah! They're lawmen. Jake, you fire on them and you'll hang. She moved past him to the porch, chin high despite her racing heart. Besides, running makes us look guilty. Sheriff Watson reined up at the gate, 5 deputies flanking him. He'd aged in the years since bringing news of Samuel's death, his weathered face bearing the weight of too many compromises. Mrs. McKenna. He touched his hat brim, not quite meeting her eyes. I've got papers here, court order from Judge Blackwood. You're to vacate the premises pending resolution of Mr. Hartley's claim. On what grounds? Sarah kept her voice level, though rage simmered beneath. prior mineral rights claim, dating back to '74. Watson handed over the documents with obvious reluctance. You've got till noon to clear out. I'm sorry. Sarah, my hands are tied. Your hands are paid for, Jake said coldly from behind her. How much did Hartley slip you, Watson? The sheriff's face flushed. Watch your tongue. Colton, you're already walking a thin line, interfering in legal matters. Legal? Jake laughed, sharp and bitter. This is theft dressed up in paper and seals. Nevertheless, Watson's hand moved to his gun. The law is the law. Mrs. McKenna, will you comply peacefully? Sarah scanned the document, legal words swimming before her eyes. But one date stood out. The supposed claim was dated a week after Samuel's death, when she'd been too grief-stricken to notice strangers filing papers on her land. This is fraudulent, she said. That claim was filed after my husband died, after we'd already homesteaded for 3 years. We have prior rights. That's for the court to decide. Watson shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. In the meantime, you need to vacate. And if I don't, then I'll have to arrest you. He said it like the words hurt. Please don't make me do that. Think of your boy. Mama? Thomas appeared in the doorway, still in his nightshirt. What's happening? The sight of him, vulnerable, frightened, nearly broke her resolve. But then she thought of Samuel, of the dreams they'd poured into this land, of all the mornings he'd kissed her in this very doorway before heading to the fields. Sheriff Watson says we have to leave, sweetheart, but I don't think that's right. She turned back to Watson. You'll have to arrest me. Sheriff, I won't abandon my home on Josiah Hartley's word. Watson's shoulders slumped. Sarah, please. The lady's made her position clear. Jake interrupted, stepping onto the porch. His presence was coiled violence barely contained. Question is, what are you going to do about it? The deputies shifted nervously. They knew Jake Colton's reputation, knew what he was capable of when cornered. Sarah saw Watson calculating. Was enforcing a questionable eviction worth potential bloodshed? I'll give you 3 days, Watson said finally. 3 days to get your affairs in order, find somewhere for the boy to stay. But come Thursday morning, if you're still here, I'll have no choice. Tom, one of the deputies started to protest. 3 days. Watson repeated firmly, that's the best I can do. As they rode away, Sarah sagged against the doorframe. 3 days. How could she fight a rigged system in 3 days? We need to move fast, Jake said, already thinking ahead. Get you to the county seat. File a counterclaim. And we need witnesses, anyone who can testify to when you and Samuel filed your original homestead papers. We? Sarah looked at him. Jake, you don't have to. Yes, he said simply. I do. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of preparation. Jake rode to neighboring homesteads, seeking support, while Sarah gathered documents and tried to keep Thomas calm. But as noon approached, the futility of it all crashed over her. Even if they reached the county seat, even if they found sympathetic ears, Hartley had money and influence she couldn't match. She found herself at Samuel's grave as the sun reached its peak. The wooden cross had weathered but still stood straight, marking the spot where her old life had ended. I don't know what to do, she whispered to the silent earth. I'm trying to hold on, but maybe I'm just being stubborn. Maybe Thomas would be better off somewhere else, somewhere safe. He'd be safer, maybe. Jake's voice came from behind her. But he wouldn't be home. She turned to find him holding wildflowers, late autumn blooms, hardy and determined. He knelt and placed them at the base of the cross with surprising gentleness. Samuel talked about you all the time, he said quietly. During the war, Sarah this, Sarah that. Used to drive us half mad with it. Man could find a way to connect anything to his wife back home. Rain. Sarah loves the rain. Beans for dinner? Sarah makes them better. Stars at night? Not as bright as Sarah's eyes. Despite everything, Sarah smiled. He always was a romantic fool. He was. Jake stood, brushing dirt from his knees. But he was also practical, strategic. You know what he told me once? Said if anything happened to him, I was to look after you. Made me swear it, that last night before we mustered out. Jake, I failed him once. Let him ride into that ambush alone because I was too drunk to watch his back. The self-loathing in his voice was razor sharp. I won't fail him again. His death wasn't your fault. The Jameson gang would never have gotten him if I'd been there. Jake's hands clenched into fists. I knew they were working that road. Should have warned him. Should have ridden with him. But I was too busy trying to forget the war in a whiskey bottle. Sarah reached out without thinking, her hand covering his fisted one. You can't save someone who's already gone, Jake, and you can't live your life as penance for a death you didn't cause. He looked at their joined hands, something shifting in his gray eyes. Maybe not, but I can keep my promise. I can keep you and Thomas safe. And what about what you want? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Is protecting us just about keeping a promise to a dead man? The air between them crackled with tension. Jake turned his hand palm up, fingers interlacing with hers. You know it's not, he said roughly. You've known for a while now. Jake, I see how you look at me sometimes. Sarah, when you think I won't notice. Like you're trying to figure out if I'm real or just convenient. His thumb traced circles on her palm. I'm real. What I feel for you, that's real too. Has been since the day Samuel introduced us, if I'm honest. But he saw you first, loved you best, and I'd never... Stop. Sarah pulled her hand away, heart hammering. Don't say any more. Not here, not at his grave. Jake stepped back, rebuilding those familiar walls. You're right. I'm sorry. That was... A gunshot cracked across the valley, cutting off his words. Then another, from the direction of the house. Thomas! Sarah lifted her skirts and ran. Jake beside her, both racing toward the sound of her son's terrified screaming. They crested the hill to find chaos. Henderson and 3 men had Thomas cornered by the chicken coop. The boy held Sarah's kitchen knife in shaking hands, a thin line of blood on his cheek where a bullet had grazed him. Let him go! Sarah screamed, maternal fury overriding fear. Henderson turned with a lazy smile. Well now, look who's back, just teaching the boy a lesson about respecting his betters. Seems he took exception to us having a look around. You have no right? Got all the right I need. Henderson patted his gun. See, mister, Hartley figured you might not comply with the sheriff's order. Thought we'd provide some encouragement. Jake had gone utterly still beside her, that dangerous stillness that preceded violence. Let the boy go, he said quietly. Your issue's not with him. My issue's with anyone squatting on Mr. Hartley's land. Henderson's smile widened. Though I gotta say, Colton, I'm glad you're here. Save me the trouble of hunting you down later. It happened fast. Henderson went for his gun, but Jake was already moving. His first shot took Henderson's gun hand, sending the weapon spinning. The second shot dropped the man beside Henderson, who was raising a rifle. Jake rolled behind the water trough as the other 2 opened fire, bullets splintering wood. Thomas, run to me, Sarah called, but her son was frozen with terror. Jake came up firing, his aim deadly accurate. Another man fell. The last one, seeing the odds shift, made a desperate choice. He grabbed Thomas, using the boy as a shield. Drop it, Colton, or the boy! He never finished. Jake's bullet took him between the eyes, so close to Thomas that powder burned the boy's hair. The man crumpled, and Thomas scrambled toward his mother, sobbing. Sarah clutched her son, checking frantically for injuries beyond the graze. Around them, the yard had become a battlefield. Henderson writhed on the ground, clutching his ruined hand. 2 men lay still. The 4th had vanished, presumably fled. It's okay, Jake said, kneeling beside them. His voice was gentle, but his eyes remained hard, scanning for threats. You're safe now, both of you. But they weren't safe. Sarah knew it even as she held her son. This had gone beyond property disputes and legal maneuvers. Blood had been spilled. There would be consequences. We have to go, she said. Now, before the sheriff comes back. Jake nodded. Pack light. Only essentials. I know a place in the mountains where we can lay low. Figure out our next move. And then, he met her eyes, And she saw the truth there. They were fugitives now, or would be soon. Hartley would spin this as murder, claim Jake had gunned down innocent men. Their time for legal remedies had run out. Then we survive, Jake said. Together. As Sarah hurried to pack, Thomas clinging to her skirts, she felt the last threads connecting her to her old life snap. The widow McKenna who'd tried to work within the system, who'd believed in law and order and the basic decency of her neighbors. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone harder, someone willing to run into the wilderness with a damaged man and trust him with her son's life. Someone who could still feel her husband's ghost, but was beginning to understand that the dead shouldn't govern the living. They left as the sun began its descent. 3 figures on horseback heading toward the mountains. Behind them, smoke rose from the house. Sarah had set it ablaze rather than let Hartley have it. The flames consumed her past, her dreams, her former self. But as Jake led them into the gathering darkness, his presence solid and reassuring, Sarah found she could bear the loss, because somewhere between the first meeting and this desperate flight, she'd found something worth saving. Not just her life or her son's, but the possibility of a future she'd never imagined. The mountain trail was treacherous in the dying light, but Jake navigated it with confidence. When Thomas swayed in his saddle, exhausted by terror and flight, Jake simply lifted the boy onto Storm with him, cradling the child against his chest. "I've got you," he murmured, and Sarah wasn't sure if he meant Thomas or all of them. As the first stars appeared overhead, she allowed herself one glance back at the burning homestead. Then she faced forward, following Jake into whatever came next. The widow's life was over. What remained to be seen was who she would become in its wake. The cave Jake led them to was hidden behind a fall of rocks and scrub pine, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Inside, it opened into a natural chamber large enough for people and horses, with a smoke hole in the ceiling and evidence of past habitation. A ring of fire-blackened stones, crude shelves carved into the rock walls. "Old hideout from my less lawful days," Jake explained, unsaddling the horses by the light of a small fire. "Water source in the back, multiple exits if we need them. We'll be safe here for a while." Safe. Sarah wondered if she'd ever feel truly safe again. She watched Thomas explore the cave with the resilience of childhood, his terror already fading into adventure. But she couldn't forget the sound of bullets, the blood on his cheek, the moment when she'd thought she might lose him. "He's tougher than he looks," Jake said quietly, following her gaze. "Takes after his mother. I should never have let it come to this." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire. "I should have taken Hartley's money. Gone somewhere." "Where?" Jake's voice was gentle but firm. "East to people who disowned you? To some city where you'd be just another widow taking in washing? You fought for your home. There's no shame in that. 4 men are dead because of my pride. 4 men are dead because they tried to harm a child." His gray eyes flashed with remembered violence. "I'd kill them again without hesitation." The simple truth of it should have frightened her. Instead, she found it oddly comforting. In a world where law had failed them, Jake's brutal protection felt like the only solid ground. They spent 3 days in the cave, falling into an unexpected domesticity. Jake hunted and scouted, always returning with news of search parties combing the lower valleys. Sarah tended the fire, prepared meals from their meager supplies, and tried to keep Thomas occupied with lessons scratched in the dirt. At night, they sat around the fire, and Jake told stories of his travels, carefully edited for young ears. On the 3rd night, with Thomas asleep in his bedroll, the weight of unspoken words became unbearable. "We can't stay here forever," Sarah said, staring into the flames. "No." Jake was cleaning his rifle. "Movements precise and automatic. I figure another day or 2, then we head north. Wyoming territory, maybe. Start fresh where nobody knows us." As what? The question hung between them. Cousins? Employer and hired hand? Or, he set the rifle aside, meeting her eyes across the fire. "That's up to you, Sarah." She thought of all the proprieties she'd clung to, all the rules that were supposed to keep her safe and respectable. They'd brought her nothing but judgment and near disaster. Out here, in this primitive shelter with a wanted man, she felt more herself than she had in months of widowhood. "I'm tired of pretending," she said softly. "Tired of being what everyone expects. The grieving widow, the proper lady, the helpless woman." Jake moved around the fire, settling beside her with careful distance between them. "What do you want to be?" "Alive." The word came out fierce. "Free, with someone who sees me as I am, not as some ghost of what I was." "Sarah, you were going to tell me something. At Samuel's grave, before the shooting." She turned to face him. "Tell me now." He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with suppressed emotion. "I've loved you since the day Samuel introduced us. You were wearing a blue dress with little flowers on it, and you had flour in your hair from baking. You laughed at something he said, and I thought I'd never heard anything so beautiful." Sarah's breath caught. "Jake, I never said anything, never would have. Samuel was my brother in all but blood, and you loved him. I saw that, respected it, but after he died," he scrubbed a hand across his face, "I told myself I was just keeping a promise, just looking after his widow. But that was a lie. Every time I came to fix something, every time I saw you fighting to hold on alone, I wanted to say the words." "What words?" Her voice was barely a whisper. He turned to her then, and the raw honesty in his eyes made her heart race. "Get your things. You're mine now." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Not very romantic, I know, but I'm not good with pretty speeches. All I know is I want to take care of you and Thomas. Want to build something new with you, not just preserve something old." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "That's why you stayed away. Why you always kept your distance. Didn't feel right. Wanting my dead friend's wife. Didn't feel honorable." He laughed bitterly. "Though I guess honor's a luxury we can't afford anymore." "Don't," Sarah placed her hand over his. "Don't cheapen this. What you've done, what you've sacrificed for us, that's more honorable than all the proper people in Cedar Ridge combined." They sat in silence, hands linked, the fire crackling between them and the vast darkness beyond. Finally, Sarah spoke the words that had been building since that first day he'd appeared with firewood. "I want to be yours, Jake. Not because I need protection or because we're running. Because somewhere between goodbye and hello, I fell in love with you too." He made a sound low in his throat, half groan, half prayer. "Sarah, are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back. You'll be tied to a man with blood on his hands and a past that won't stay buried. We all have pasts." She thought of the house she'd burned, the life she'd abandoned. What matters is the future, our future. The kiss was inevitable then, a collision of loneliness and longing, desperation and hope. Jake's hands framed her face with surprising gentleness, as if she might break or vanish. Sarah leaned into him, tasting whiskey and smoke, feeling the solid reality of him after so many months of emptiness. When they parted, breathless, she saw wonder in his eyes. "I never imagined you'd—" "I know," she smiled through tears. "Neither did I, but Samuel's gone, and we're alive. I think he'd want us to be happy." "Tomorrow," Jake said, voice rough with promise. "We'll find a preacher, make it proper, legal." Since when do outlaws care about legal? Since they fall in love with respectable widows. He kissed her again, softer this time. "You deserve better than a cave and a wanted man, but I swear I'll spend my life trying to give you the world." A small cough made them spring apart. Thomas stood at the edge of the firelight, rubbing sleepy eyes. "Mama, are you crying?" Sarah wiped her cheeks hastily. "Happy tears, sweetheart. Come here." Thomas patted over, settling between them with the trust of childhood. "Are we going to be a real family now? You and me and Mr. Jake?" Sarah looked at Jake over her son's head, saw the question and promise in his eyes. "Would you like that?" "Yeah," Thomas yawned. "Mister, Jake's teaching me to track and shoot, and he tells better stories than anyone, and he doesn't look sad all the time like you do." out of the mouths of babes. Sarah thought. Then yes, we're going to be a real family. Good. Thomas snuggled against Jake's side with easy affection. Can we have a real house too? This cave is fun, but it's cold. We'll have a house, Jake promised, his arm coming around the boy. North of here, where the grass is green and the water runs clear, build it myself, with a big porch for your mama and a barn for horses. And a dog, the biggest, meanest dog we can find. As Thomas drifted back to sleep, Sarah caught Jake's eye. This was what she'd been fighting for. She realized, not just land or legacy, but the chance for her son to have a father again, for herself to have a partner, for all of them to have hope. The next morning brought riders in the valley below, a large search party with dogs. Jake watched them from a concealed vantage point, then returned with grim news. Hartley's put a bounty on our heads, $500 for me, $100 for you. $100? Sarah felt oddly insulted. That's all? Jake's laugh was surprised and genuine. That's my girl, always finding the fight even in bad news. They packed quickly, efficiently, as they prepared to leave their temporary sanctuary. Sarah took one last look around the cave that had sheltered them. In a strange way, she'd found herself here, found love, found courage, found the strength to let go of the past. Ready? Jake asked. Thomas already mounted in front of him on Storm. Ready? Sarah said, swinging up onto her own mount. They rode out into the morning light. 3 figures against the vast landscape. Behind them lay Cedar Ridge, Samuel's grave, and the ashes of old dreams. Ahead waited uncertainty, danger, and the promise of something new. As they climbed higher into the mountains, Jake began to whistle, a jaunty tune that made Thomas laugh. Sarah found herself smiling despite everything. They were outlaws now, fugitives from a corrupt system, but they were together, and somehow that made all the difference. Get your things, Jake had said in the cave. You're mine now. Not a command anymore, but a covenant, a promise written in flight and survival, sealed with kisses and a child's trusting sleep. Sarah urged her horse forward, following her unlikely savior into their uncertain future, and found she had no regrets. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist, somewhere behind them. Dogs howled on a cold trail, but ahead, the mountains opened into endless possibility, and Sarah McKenna, soon to be Sarah Colton, rode toward it with her son and the man who'd taught her that sometimes love comes not as a gentle rain, but as a wildfire that burns away the old to make room for the new. The canyon narrowed ahead, red walls rising like the gates of judgment on either side. Jake pulled Storm to a halt, raising his hand for silence. The morning wind carried voices, rough laughter and the clink of spurs on stone. How many? Sarah whispered, drawing Thomas closer against her. 4, maybe 5. Jake's eyes never left the bend ahead. They're waiting. Must have figured we'd take Eagle Pass. Is there another way? Not without backtracking 2 days. He turned in the saddle, gray eyes assessing. Sarah, I need you to take Thomas and climb up there. He pointed to a narrow ledge 20 feet up the canyon wall. Whatever happens, you stay hidden. If things go bad... No. Her voice was steel. We're not separating. Not now. Sarah, I can shoot. You taught me yourself these past days. She shifted her coat, revealing Samuel's pistol at her hip. We face this together or not at all. Jake studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, but Thomas goes up the ledge. Non-negotiable. They secured the horses in a grove of juniper, and Jake helped Thomas climb to safety, pressing his spare derringer into the boy's small hands. Only if someone tries to climb up after you, he instructed quietly. Aim for the chest and squeeze gentle-like. Thomas nodded solemnly, fear and determination warring in his young face. Sarah kissed him quickly, then followed Jake toward the ambush site. They heard Henderson before they saw him, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. Should have killed that brat when I had the chance. Would have saved us this chase. Hartley wants them alive. Another voice replied. Especially the woman. Says he's got plans for her. Sarah's skin crawled at the implications. Beside her, Jake had gone utterly still. That dangerous quietness that preceded violence. Alive doesn't mean undamaged, Henderson continued. Sarah could hear the smile in his voice despite his wounded hand. Plenty of ways to make a woman compliant without killing her. Jake moved then, fluid as water, positioning himself behind a boulder. He held up 3 fingers, then pointed. 3 men visible, at least 2 more hidden. Sarah's mouth went dry, but she forced herself to breathe slowly, remembering his lessons. Steady hands, clear sight, squeeze, don't jerk. I'll draw their fire, Jake whispered. When they turn toward me, you take whoever's closest, then get back to Thomas. Before she could protest, he was moving, calling out in a voice that echoed off canyon walls. Henderson, figured you'd be nursing that hand I gave you. Gunfire erupted immediately, bullets whining off rocks. Sarah saw her target, a lean man scrambling for better position. She aimed, breathed out slowly, and squeezed. The pistol bucked in her hand, and the man spun sideways, clutching his shoulder. The woman! Get the woman! More gunfire, deafening in the narrow canyon. Sarah scrambled backward, reload fumbling with shaking fingers. A figure loomed above her. She fired without thinking, the bullet catching him center mass. He toppled backward with a surprised grunt. Sarah! Down! She dropped flat as Jake's rifle cracked overhead. Another man fell, but more were coming, and their position was being flanked. Sarah could see Henderson directing his remaining men, his ruined hand wrapped in dirty bandages. Then she heard it. Thomas screaming from the ledge. A 5th man had circled behind, was climbing toward her son. Without thought, Sarah broke cover, running toward the threat. Bullets sparked off rocks around her, but all she could see was Thomas backing away from the climbing figure, the derringer forgotten in his terror. Jake's rifle spoke again, and the climber fell backward with a scream, but the distraction cost them. Sarah felt the bullet before she heard the shot, a burning line across her ribs that spun her sideways. She hit the ground hard, gasping, Sarah! Jake's roar echoed off stone. Then his guns were speaking in a deadly rhythm, the controlled fire of a man who'd learned his trade in blood. Through pain-blurred vision, Sarah saw Henderson rushing her position. She raised the pistol with trembling hands, but he kicked it away, his boot connecting with her wounded ribs. Agony whited out her vision. Got you now, witch! Henderson snarled, reaching for her. The shot that killed him came from above. Sarah blinked, focusing through tears to see Thomas on the ledge, the derringer smoking in his small hands. Henderson looked almost comically surprised before crumpling beside her. Then Jake was there, lifting her with gentle hands. How bad? Not deep, she managed. Just bloody. The canyon had fallen silent except for the ringing in her ears. Jake's quick examination confirmed her assessment, a graze along her ribs. Painful and messy, but not fatal. He bound it quickly with strips torn from his shirt. Thomas, she called. I'm okay. Mama. His voice was shaky but proud. I got him, just like Jake taught me. You did good, son. Jake called back. Stay put a minute more. He made a quick circuit of the battleground, confirming what Sarah already knew. 5 men dead. The ambush turned into a massacre. When he returned, his face was grim. We need to move. This many dead. Hartley will send an army next time. They retrieved Thomas, who clung to Sarah despite her wince of pain. The boy was trying to be brave, but she could feel him trembling. You saved my life, she told him softly. You're the bravest boy I know. I was scared, he admitted. But he was going to hurt you, and Jake says we protect family. Family, even through the pain. The word warmed her. They rode hard despite Sarah's injury, pushing deeper into the wild country. By afternoon, Jake had found what he was looking for, a clear stream running through a meadow, with good sight lines and a defensible position in the rocks above. We'll rest here, he decided. Let me look at that wound proper. Sarah endured his ministrations with gritted teeth. The bullet had carved a furrow along 2 ribs, deep enough to bleed freely but missing anything vital. Jake cleaned it with whiskey that burned like fire, then bound it properly with clean cloth from their supplies. "You'll have a scar," he said quietly. "Another one for the collection." She tried for lightness, but exhaustion weighted her words. "Sarah," his hand stilled on the bandage. "What you did back there, breaking cover for Thomas, was stupid, I know, was exactly what a mother does." His gray eyes held depths of emotion. "But next time, trust me to handle it. I can't lose you, either of you." That night, around their small fire, the reality of their situation settled over them like a shroud. 7 men dead in 2 encounters. The territory would be buzzing with wanted posters. Their faces would be known, their descriptions circulated. "We could go to Mexico," Jake suggested. "I know people there. Could start over where U.S. law can't reach." "No." Sarah looked at Thomas, dozing against Jake's shoulder. "He deserves better than a life in exile." "We all do." Then what? She'd been thinking about it all day, a wild plan born of desperation and hope. "We turn the tables. Go on the offensive." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Explain. Hartley's the real criminal here. Forgery, attempted murder, conspiracy. If we could get evidence, testimony." "From who?" "The whole town's either scared of him or paid by him." "Not everyone." Sarah thought of Sheriff Watson's reluctance, of Henry Morrison's sympathetic eyes. "There are good people in Cedar Ridge. They just need someone to stand up first." "That's a dangerous game. Sarah, Hartley's got resources we don't." "But we have something he doesn't." She met his eyes across the fire. "We have nothing left to lose, and we have each other." Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What did you have in mind?" They talked through the night, planning and discarding ideas. By dawn, they had the bones of a scheme, risky, probably foolish, but better than running forever. "I know a judge in Denver," Jake said. "Federal man. Can't be bought. If we could get to him with proof." "Then we need proof." Sarah winced as she sat up, ribs protesting. "Which means going back." "No, absolutely not." "Jake?" "I said no." His voice was flat with finality. "I'm not taking you back into danger. You're not taking me anywhere," Sarah replied evenly. "I'm choosing to go. There's a difference." They stared at each other across the cooling ashes, 2 stubborn souls colliding. Finally, Jake laughed, short and rueful. "Sam warned me you were headstrong, said it was what he loved most and what drove him craziest." Samuel accepted it. "Can you? Do I have a choice?" "Always." Sarah reached across to take his hand. "But I hope you'll choose to trust me, to treat me as a partner, not a possession." Jake turned her hand over, tracing the calluses that months of hard work had built. "Partners," he agreed. "God help us both." As the sun rose over the canyon walls, painting the world in shades of gold and crimson, they prepared for the most dangerous game of all, turning from prey to predator. Sarah checked her pistol, wincing at the pull on her ribs. The widow McKenna would never have imagined this path, but the woman she'd become, forged in fire and desperation, was ready for whatever came next. "Sarah," Jake said quietly as they prepared to ride, "what I said before, in the cave. Get your things. You're mine now." She smiled at the memory. "Yeah, that." He looked almost shy. This dangerous man who'd killed to protect them. "I meant it, all of it. But I need you to know, you're not mine like property. You're mine like my heart's mine. Part of me. The best part." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "Jake Colton, are you trying to be romantic?" "Trying." He grimaced. "Not very good at it. You're perfect." She leaned across Storm's neck to kiss him, brief but full of promise. "And you're mine too. The same way. Always." Thomas stirred then, waking with the resilience of childhood. "Are we going on an adventure today?" "The biggest yet," Jake told him, settling the boy in front of him. "Ready to be brave again?" I'm always brave now. Thomas declared, "You and Mama taught me." As they rode toward their uncertain future, Sarah reflected on the strange turns of fate. She'd lost a husband, a home, her old life, but she'd gained something precious, a love born of fire and tested in blood, a partner who saw her strength instead of her weakness, and the chance to build something new from the ashes of the old. The canyon opened before them, red walls giving way to endless sky. Somewhere beyond waited Josiah Hartley and his corrupt empire, but also waiting were possibilities, justice, redemption, and the hope of a life lived freely. "Together?" Jake asked, raining storm beside her. "Together," Sarah confirmed, ignoring the pain in her ribs and the danger ahead. And together they rode toward the rising sun. Three unlikely warriors bound by love and determination, ready to face whatever battles the day would bring. The town of Cedar Ridge looked different in the pre-dawn darkness. Sarah pulled her hat low, grateful for the men's clothes Jake had procured and the shadows that hid her identity. Beside her, Jake moved with predatory silence, every sense alert for danger. They'd left Thomas with a trusted friend in the neighboring valley, a debt Jake had called in from his past life. "Morrison keeps his records in the back office," Sarah whispered. "And Watson, if he's where I think he is, we might get lucky." They split up at the alley behind Main Street. Jake headed for the sheriff's office while Sarah slipped through the darkness toward Morrison's store. The key was where Henry had always hidden it, under the third flower pot by the back door. She'd seen him retrieve it once when she'd come early for supplies. Inside, the familiar smells of the store made her chest tight with memories. How many times had she shopped here as Samuel's wife, then as his widow? Now she was a fugitive, breaking in like a common thief. Except thieves took things. She was here to return something to the light. The records were exactly where she'd hoped. Ledgers showing payments from Hartley to various town officials, including a substantial sum to Judge Blackwood the week before Samuel's death. Her hands shook as she copied the relevant entries. This was it, proof of conspiracy dating back over a year. A floorboard creaked behind her. Sarah spun, hand going to her pistol, to find Henry Morrison in his nightshirt, shotgun raised. "Sarah?" His voice was shocked. "Good Lord, woman, what are you doing?" "What I should have done months ago." She kept her hands visible, non-threatening, looking for the truth about Hartley. Henry's gun wavered. "You shouldn't have come back. There's a bounty." "I know." She gestured to the ledgers. "Did you know about these payments? Did you know Hartley was planning to steal our land before Samuel even died?" The storekeeper's face crumpled. "I suspected, but what could I do? He owns half the town, has men like Henderson to enforce his will. Henderson's dead." Sarah watched understanding dawn in his eyes. "Along with 6 others who tried to murder us, we're done running. Henry, but we need help." "I can't. My family." "Your family has to live in this town too, under Hartley's thumb. Is that what you want for your children, your grandchildren?" Henry stared at her for a long moment, then slowly lowered the shotgun. "What do you need?" 20 minutes later, Sarah emerged with copied ledger pages and something more valuable: Henry Morrison's promise to testify. One voice of conscience in a town of cowards. It was a start. She met Jake at the rendezvous point, an abandoned barn on the edge of town, but he wasn't alone. Sheriff Watson sat on a hay bale, hands bound, looking older than his years. Tom agreed to talk. Jake said without preamble, "Seems his conscience has been troubling him." "Sarah," Watson couldn't meet her eyes. "I'm sorry about everything. I wanted to help, but Hartley has been paying you to look the other way." Sarah showed him the ledger entries. $300 the week of Samuel's murder. Blood money. Sheriff. Watson flinched. "I didn't know he planned to kill anyone. Thought it was just about the land. By the time I realized." He shook his head. "I was in too deep. He owned me." "He doesn't own you now," Jake said quietly. "Question is, are you brave enough to stand up?" The sheriff was quiet for a long moment. Then, "The Jameson gang. Hartley hired them. Has letters in his safe proving it. They were supposed to rob Samuel, make it look random, but they got carried away. Killed him instead. Sarah's knees nearly buckled. She'd suspected, but knowing for certain. You're sure? Saw the letters myself when Hartley was gloating. Watson looked up finally, tears tracking through the dust on his face. I've been a coward. Sarah, let your husband's killer walk free. Let him terrorize you. But maybe it's not too late to make it right. Dawn was breaking as they finalized their plan. Watson would return to his office, act normal while secretly gathering deputies who weren't in Hartley's pocket. Henry would rally the decent townspeople, and at noon, when Hartley held court at the bank like he did every Monday, they'd make their move. It's risky, Jake warned as they prepared to take positions. If even one person warns him, then we're dead. Sarah checked her pistol one last time. But we're dead anyway if we keep running. At least this way, we die trying to build something better for Thomas. Jake caught her hand. We're not dying today. I promise you that. Don't make promises you can't keep. I've kept every promise I've made to you. His gray eyes held hers. I'm not stopping now. The morning crawled by. Sarah positioned herself on the roof of the millinery shop, giving her clear sight of the bank entrance. Jake took the livery stable across the street. Watson moved through town, quietly gathering men. At 11:30, Hartley arrived in his fancy carriage, accompanied by 4 bodyguards. Sarah's heart sank. They'd expected 2, maybe 3, but then she saw something else. Townspeople gathering in unusual numbers. Henry had done his work well. Word had spread. Noon came with the church bells ringing. Sarah watched Watson approach the bank, saw him falter as Hartley's men tensed. For a moment, she thought he'd lost his nerve. Then Jake emerged from the livery, rifle casual in his hands, and Watson straightened. Josiah Hartley, the sheriff called out, voice carrying across the street. You're under arrest for conspiracy, murder, and fraud. Hartley laughed, the sound carrying clearly. Have you lost your mind? Tom, you work for me. Not anymore. Watson drew his gun. Come quietly, and gunfire erupted. Hartley's men went for their weapons, but Jake was already moving, his rifle speaking with deadly precision. Sarah sighted down her pistol, picking her target, trying not to think about the fact that she was shooting at human beings in broad daylight. The battle was brief but vicious. When the gun smoke cleared, 2 of Hartley's guards lay dead, 1 wounded, 1 surrendering. Hartley himself cowered behind his carriage wheel, fancy suit torn and dusty. It's over, Hartley. Sarah called down from her perch. Your reign of terror ends today. You! His face contorted with rage. You should have taken the money, you stupid. That's enough. Jake's voice cut like a blade. He stood over Hartley now, gun trained, steady. Sarah, come on down. Let the law handle him now. She climbed down carefully, ribs protesting. The townspeople pressed closer, murmuring. She heard anger in those voices, years of resentment finally finding expression. How many had Hartley cheated, threatened, destroyed? We found the safe, Watson reported, emerging from the bank with a strongbox. Letters, like I said, proof of everything. Sarah took the letters with trembling hands. There it was, in black and white. Orders to the Jameson gang, payment receipts, plans to drive her off the land dated weeks before Samuel's death. You killed him, she said to Hartley, voice steady despite her tears. Murdered a good man for profit. Business, Hartley spat. Just business. Your husband was weak, clinging to worthless land. I offered fair price. Jake's fist connected with Hartley's jaw, dropping him cold. Fair, he said conversationally, shaking out his hand. Just fair. The federal judge arrived 3 days later, summoned by telegraph. The trial was swift with Watson's testimony, Morrison's ledgers, and the letters. Conviction was certain. Hartley would hang for murder. His empire dismantled. His stolen lands returned to their rightful owners. Sarah stood in the cemetery as the sun set, Jake beside her, Thomas playing quietly among the headstones. She placed fresh wildflowers on Samuel's grave, the same late-blooming ones Jake had brought that day that seemed a lifetime ago. "We did it," she told the silent stone. "Found justice for you, protected our son. I hope you're at peace now." Jake's hand found hers, warm and solid. Has been since he knew you were safe. How can you know that? Because that's all I'd want." He smiled softly. "If it were me in the ground and you up here, just to know you were safe. Happy, living." They were married the next week in the little church, with Thomas as ring-bearer and half the town in attendance. The same people who'd whispered about the scandalous widow now celebrated her courage. Sarah wore her mother's dress, altered to fit, and Jake looked uncomfortable but handsome in his borrowed suit. "Do you, Jake Colton, take this woman?" Reverend Michaels intoned, carefully not meeting Sarah's eyes. She'd forgiven him, but neither would forget his earlier judgment. "I do," Jake said firmly. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after." "And do you, Sarah McKenna, take this man with all my heart?" Sarah interrupted, making Jake grin. "Forever and then some." The kiss that sealed their union was tender, full of promise and hard-won peace. Thomas cheered louder than anyone, finally having the complete family he'd yearned for. They rebuilt on Sarah's land, not just the barn, but a proper house with Jake's promised big porch. The territory provided compensation for their ordeal, enough to start fresh. Jake raised horses, teaching Thomas everything he knew. Sarah planted her garden with those seeds Jake had given her so long ago, watching them grow strong in soil enriched by ashes. On quiet evenings, they'd sit on that porch, watching the sun paint the prairie gold. Sometimes Sarah would catch Jake looking at her with wonder, as if he still couldn't believe she'd chosen him. In those moments, she'd recall his words from that desperate night in the mountains. "Get your things, you're mine now." Not a command anymore, but a declaration of belonging that went both ways. She was his, yes, but he was hers too, along with Thomas, the land, and the life they'd built from the ashes of tragedy. The prairie wind carried the scent of sage and possibility, and Sarah Colton, rancher's wife, mother, survivor, knew she was exactly where she belonged, not because a man had claimed her, but because she'd claimed herself first, then chosen to share that self with a complicated soul who'd proven worthy of the gift. In the distance, storm clouds gathered, but Sarah didn't fear them anymore. She'd weathered worse and emerged stronger. Whatever came, they'd face it together, a family forged in fire, tempered by love, and stronger than any force that might try to break them. The ghost of Samuel McKenna rested easy at last, knowing his wife and son were not just safe, but truly alive. And in the golden light of another western sunset, 3 hearts beat as one, proof that sometimes the greatest love stories are written not in perfection, but in the courage to begin again. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. Where are you enjoying this story from? Share your location in the comments below so we can connect with fellow listeners around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and let us know your thoughts on Sarah and Jake's journey. Your comments fuel our passion for bringing these frontier stories to life.